6 months after my daughter's wedding, the photographer called and said words that made my blood run cold. "Ma'am, I found something in the photos that you need to see immediately, but please don't tell your daughter yet." I remember standing in my kitchen in Atlanta, the phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt, my hands starting to shake as I gripped the counter. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across the marble countertops, and I could hear my husband watching television in the living room, completely unaware that our world was about to shatter into a million pieces. Marcus Chun, the photographer we had hired for $2,500 because everyone said he was the best in the city, had never called us after delivering the wedding album 6 months ago. So why now? Why this urgent tone in his voice that made my stomach twist into knots? I agreed to meet him at his studio in Midtown the next morning, telling my husband I had a dentist appointment because I couldn't bring myself to worry him until I knew what this was about. That night, I barely slept, tossing and turning beside him, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Had Marcus discovered that Jennifer's husband was cheating on her already? Had he captured something inappropriate at the reception? My daughter had been so happy on her wedding day, absolutely radiant in her ivory Vera Wang gown, her face glowing as she walked down the aisle of the historic church where 3 generations of our family had been married. Jennifer and Michael had been together for 4 years before he proposed, and we all adore him, this kind, ambitious young man who worked as a financial analyst and treated our daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. The next morning I drove through Atlanta's heavy traffic, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, my heart pounding in my chest as I navigated through the congested streets toward Marcus's studio. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more real-life accounts like this one, please click that subscribe button right now because your support helps this channel grow and reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. The studio is located in a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and high ceilings, the kind of trendy space that creative professionals in Atlanta loved. Marcus greeted me at the door, his usually cheerful face drawn and serious, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept well either. He was a man in his early 40s, always impeccably dressed, but today his shirt was wrinkled and his hair uncombed. He led me to his office in the back, a small room cluttered with camera equipment, hard drives, and prints scattered across every surface. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to show you something that I discovered completely by accident," he said, his voice low and careful as he gestured for me to sit in the chair beside his desk. I was going through the raw files from Jennifer's wedding because another client asked me to recreate a similar lighting setup, and I noticed something in the background of several photos that I had missed during the initial editing process. My mouth went dry as he pulled up his computer screen, and I leaned forward, my eyes straining to see what he was about to reveal. The first image appeared, a beautiful shot of Jennifer and Michael during their first dance, her head resting on his shoulder, both of them smiling with pure joy. But Marcus zoomed in on the background, past the other couples on the dance floor, past the elegant floral centerpieces and the crystal chandeliers, to a table in the far corner of the reception hall. There, partially hidden by a column, sat Michael's father, Richard, and he wasn't watching the happy couple dance. He was leaning close to a woman, a beautiful woman in a burgundy dress that I didn't recognize from the guest list, and his hand was on her thigh under the table, his face turned toward hers in a way that was unmistakably intimate. My breath caught in my throat, but Marcus wasn't finished. He clicked to the next photo, this one taken during the cocktail hour in the garden. Richard was standing behind a hedge, away from the other guests, and the same woman was with him, their bodies pressed together, his hands on her waist, their faces so close they were almost kissing. "Oh my God," I whispered, my hand flying to my mouth as the implications started to sink in. Richard had been married to Michael's mother, Catherine, for 32 years, and she had been at the wedding, elegant and gracious in her mother-of-the-groom dress, completely unaware that her husband was carrying on with another woman right under her nose. Marcus clicked through more photos, and in each one, he had found Richard and this mystery woman in stolen moments throughout the wedding day, during the ceremony preparation when he was supposed to be helping his son get ready, during the family photos when he had disappeared for 15 minutes and we all thought he was taking a phone call, during the reception when he claimed he was stepping outside for fresh air. The evidence was irrefutable and heartbreaking. "There's more," Marcus said quietly, and I felt my stomach drop even further. He pulled up a photo from the parking lot, time-stamped at 11:30 at night, near the end of the reception. Richard was getting into a car with this woman, and they were clearly leaving together, even though Catherine had left an hour earlier claiming she had a migraine and Richard had promised to get a ride home with friends. I sat back in the chair, my mind reeling, trying to process what this meant for everyone involved. "Does Catherine know?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus shook his head. "I have no idea, Mrs. Patterson, but I felt obligated to tell someone in the family because I keep thinking about what if this were my wife. What if someone had evidence that I was being unfaithful and they said nothing?" I appreciated his integrity, his moral struggle evident in his troubled expression, but now I was faced with an impossible decision. Do I tell Catherine, a woman I had grown close to over the 4 years our children dated, knowing it would destroy her? Do I tell my daughter, knowing it would shatter her image of her father-in-law and potentially damage her marriage? Do I tell my husband and let him decide what to do? Or do I confront Richard directly and give him a chance to come clean on his own terms? Your subscription to this channel means everything as we work toward 1,000 subscribers, so if you haven't clicked that subscribe button yet, please do it now because these stories need to be heard and shared. I asked Marcus to send me copies of all the photos, and I left his studio in a daze, driving aimlessly through Atlanta for over an hour, unable to go home and face my husband, unable to call my daughter and pretend everything was fine. I ended up parking at Piedmont Park, walking along the paths where families were playing and joggers were running, everyone going about their normal lives while mine had just been turned upside down. I thought about Catherine, how she had welcomed Jennifer into their family with such warmth, how she had spent weeks helping plan the wedding, how she had cried tears of joy as she watched her son marry the woman he loved. She deserved to know the truth, but would knowing destroy her? I thought about Jennifer, my beautiful, trusting daughter who had always looked up to Michael's parents as an example of a strong, lasting marriage, who had told me just last week how lucky she felt to have such wonderful in-laws. Would this revelation poison her relationship with Michael? Would she blame herself somehow, feel tainted by her father-in-law's betrayal? I thought about Michael, who idolized his father, who had asked Richard to be his best man, who had given a tearful speech at the reception about how his dad had taught him everything about being a good husband. How would he cope with learning that his father was a hypocrite and a cheater? And I thought about Richard himself, this man I had trusted, this man who had given a touching toast about love and commitment and partnership, all while carrying on an affair. By the time I got home that evening, I had made my decision. I told my husband everything, showing him the photos on my laptop, watching his face go from confusion to shock to anger. James was a straightforward man, an engineer who believed in facts and honesty, and his reaction was immediate. "We have to tell Catherine," he said firmly, pacing our living room with his hands clenched into fists. "How can we not tell her? If someone knew I was cheating on you, and they kept it from you, you would never forgive them." He was right, but I was terrified of the consequences. We debated for hours, our voices rising and falling as we went back and forth, considering every angle, every possible outcome. Finally, we agreed on a course of action. We would confront Richard first, give him 24 hours to tell Catherine himself, and if he didn't, we would tell her. The next morning, I called Richard and told him I needed to speak with him urgently and privately. He suggested meeting at a coffee shop near his office in Buckhead, and I agreed, arriving early and choosing a table in the back corner where we wouldn't be overheard. When Richard walked in, looking confident and relaxed in his expensive suit, I felt a surge of anger so strong I had to take a deep breath to control it. He sat down across from me, ordering a cappuccino like this was just a friendly chat, and I slid my phone across the table showing him one of Marcus's photos. I watched the color drain from his face, watched his hand shake as he picked up the phone and stared at the image, watched his confident demeanor crumble into something small and guilty and pathetic. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice cold and steady despite the fury burning in my chest. Richard couldn't meet my eyes, staring down at the table as he mumbled, 2 years. 2 years. He had been cheating on Catherine for 2 years, through family holidays and birthdays and anniversaries, through his son's engagement and wedding planning, through every moment that should have been sacred. Who is she? I demanded, and Richard finally looked up at me, his eyes red and watery. Her name is Vanessa. She works in my office. It started at a conference in Miami, and I tried to end it so many times, but I couldn't. His excuses meant nothing to me, and I told him so. You have 24 hours to tell Catherine everything, or I will tell her myself, and I will show her every single photo Marcus captured of you and your mistress at our children's wedding. Richard begged me not to tell her, claimed it would destroy their family, insisted that he would end the affair, and Catherine never had to know, but I was unmoved. If you're still watching and this story is resonating with you, please take a moment to click subscribe because we're so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers and every single one of you matters in helping this channel grow. I told Richard that Catherine deserved to know the truth, that he had made his choices and now he had to face the consequences, and that if he truly loved his wife, he would give her the respect of hearing it from him rather than from me. I left the coffee shop without looking back, my hands trembling as I got into my car, adrenaline and righteousness coursing through my veins. 24 hours passed, and I heard nothing from Richard or Catherine. I called Richard's cell phone, and it went straight to voicemail. I texted him asking if he had told her, and he responded with a single word: no. That afternoon, James and I drove to Richard and Catherine's home, a beautiful colonial in one of Atlanta's most prestigious neighborhoods, our hearts heavy with the burden we were about to deliver. Catherine answered the door with a warm smile, delighted to see us, inviting us in for tea, completely oblivious to why we were really there. We sat in her elegant living room with its cream-colored sofas and fresh flowers, and I felt like an executioner as I told her we needed to talk about something serious. I started by apologizing for what I was about to tell her, and I watched confusion cross her face, then concern, then fear as I explained about the photographer's call and the photos he had discovered. I showed her the images on my laptop, one after another, and I watched the strong, dignified woman crumble before my eyes. She stared at the photos in silence for what felt like an eternity, her face expressionless, but I could see her hands shaking, see the tears gathering in her eyes, see the moment when the reality fully hit her, and she let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice breaking, and I told her I didn't know, that he had refused to tell her himself despite my ultimatum. Catherine stood up abruptly, asking us to leave, and though it felt wrong to abandon her in that moment, we respected her wishes and left. Over the next few days, the situation exploded in ways I hadn't anticipated. Catherine confronted Richard that evening, and according to what I later learned, he initially denied everything until she showed him the photos, at which point he broke down and confessed not just to the affair but to the fact that he had been planning to leave her for Vanessa. Catherine threw him out of the house that night, and he moved into a hotel while she consulted with a divorce attorney. Michael found out when his mother called him, hysterical and heartbroken, and he immediately called Jennifer, who called me in tears, confused and devastated by the news. My daughter couldn't understand how this had been happening for 2 years without anyone noticing, couldn't comprehend how her father-in-law could have carried on an affair at her wedding, couldn't reconcile the man she thought she knew with the man in those photos. Michael was destroyed, feeling betrayed by his father and guilty for not somehow seeing the signs, and the stress began to affect his marriage to Jennifer. They argued about whether Michael should cut his father off completely or try to maintain some kind of relationship, argued about how to support Catherine while dealing with their own feelings, argued about trust and fidelity and what this meant for their own future. I watched helplessly as my daughter's happiness eroded, as the newlywed glow faded from her face, as she started questioning everything about love and marriage and commitment. She called me late at night, sobbing, asking how she could believe in marriage when even couples who had been together for 32 years could fall apart, asking if she could trust Michael when his own father was a cheater, asking if I thought she had made a mistake marrying into this family. Please help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers by clicking that subscribe button. Your support means we can continue sharing these important stories that so many people relate to. The divorce proceedings were brutal and public, at least within our social circle. Richard's affair became the talk of our community, and Catherine had to endure the humiliation of everyone knowing that her husband had betrayed her. She lost weight, stopped attending social events, threw herself into work as a way to cope with the pain and betrayal. I visited her regularly, bringing meals and just sitting with her as she processed her grief, and in those quiet moments, she thanked me for telling her the truth even though it had shattered her world. "I would have wanted to know," she said one afternoon as we sat in her garden, the same garden where we had planned Jennifer's bridal shower just 2 years earlier. "Living a lie would have been worse than knowing the truth, no matter how much it hurts." Michael eventually confronted his father, and their conversation did not go well. Richard tried to justify his actions, claimed he had fallen out of love with Catherine years ago, said that Vanessa made him feel alive in ways his wife never had, but Michael wasn't interested in excuses. He told his father that he had destroyed their family, had tainted Michael's wedding memories forever, had proven himself to be a man without integrity or honor. They didn't speak for months after that confrontation, and I knew Michael was struggling with feelings of anger, disappointment, and loss. The man he had admired his entire life had revealed himself to be deeply flawed, and Michael had to grieve not just for his parents' marriage, but for the image of his father that he had carried all his life. Jennifer and Michael's marriage survived, but it took work. They went to couples counseling to process the trauma of what had happened and to make sure they built their relationship on a foundation stronger than what Michael's parents had. Jennifer learned to separate Michael from his father's actions, to trust that her husband was his own person with his own values and integrity. Michael learned to be more open about his feelings, to share his vulnerabilities with Jennifer instead of trying to handle everything on his own. Slowly, over many months, they rebuilt the joy and trust that had been damaged by Richard's betrayal, and I was so proud of them for choosing to fight for their marriage rather than letting someone else's mistakes destroy what they had built together. Catherine eventually finalized her divorce after 8 months of legal battles over assets and retirement accounts and the house they had built together. She got the house, a significant portion of Richard's retirement savings, and her freedom from a man who had lied to her for years. She started therapy, joined a support group for women going through divorce, and slowly began to rebuild her life and her sense of self-worth. I watched her transform from a broken woman into someone stronger and more independent, someone who knew her value wasn't determined by her husband's faithfulness or lack thereof. She started traveling, something Richard had never wanted to do, visiting Italy and France and Spain, sending Jennifer postcards from each destination with messages about finding herself and embracing new adventures. Richard and Vanessa moved in together, and from what I heard through the grapevine, their relationship was already showing cracks. The excitement of an affair apparently didn't translate well into everyday domestic life, and without the thrill of sneaking around, they had to face the reality that their relationship was built on betrayal and selfishness. Richard tried to reach out to Michael several times, sending emails and texts that mostly went unanswered, occasionally showing up at Michael and Jennifer's apartment unannounced, desperate to repair the relationship with his son. Michael kept him at arm's length, unwilling to fully cut him off but unable to pretend that everything was fine between them. If you're finding value in this story and want to be part of this community, clicking subscribe would mean the world and helps us get closer to our goal of 1,000 subscribers. As for Marcus, the photographer, I sent him a heartfelt thank you note and a generous tip for having the integrity to share what he had discovered. He had been under no obligation to go through those photos again or to reach out to me with information that he knew would cause pain, but he had done it anyway because he believed people deserved to know the truth. His decision to call me had changed the trajectory of multiple lives, had saved Catherine from continuing to live a lie, had forced Richard to face the consequences of his actions, and had taught all of us important lessons about honesty, integrity, and the price of betrayal. Now, 2 years after that phone call from Marcus, life has settled into a new normal. Jennifer and Michael are doing well, stronger than ever, talking about starting a family and buying their first house. Catherine has a new life, new friends, new hobbies, and a peace that comes from living authentically without the weight of someone else's lies. She's even started dating again, nothing serious yet, but she's open to the possibility of finding love with someone who will treat her with the respect and fidelity she deserves. Richard is still with Vanessa, though rumors suggest they're unhappy and that he regrets losing his family for a relationship that hasn't brought him the happiness he thought it would. As for me, I learned that sometimes the hardest thing to do is also the right thing to do. Telling Catherine the truth was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. Watching her world fall apart in front of me was devastating, and dealing with the aftermath as it affected my daughter and son-in-law tested me in ways I never expected. But I know in my heart that keeping that secret would have been worse, that allowing Catherine to continue living a lie would have been a betrayal of our friendship and of basic human decency. I learned that truth, no matter how painful, is always better than comfortable deception, and that integrity means doing the right thing even when it's hard, even when it causes pain, even when the consequences are severe and far-reaching. I also learned to appreciate the strength of my own marriage, to never take for granted the trust and commitment that James and I have built over 35 years together. What happened with Richard and Catherine reminded me that marriage requires constant work, constant communication, constant choosing each other day after day. It reminded me that betrayal doesn't just hurt the person being cheated on but ripples out to affect children, extended family, friends, and even people on the periphery of your life. It reminded me that our actions have consequences that extend far beyond what we can imagine in the moment we make our choices. The wedding photos that were supposed to capture one of the happiest days of our family's life instead became evidence of betrayal and deception, a permanent record of infidelity happening in the background while everyone celebrated love and commitment in the foreground. Marcus kept those photos confidential, never sharing them with anyone else, and Jennifer and Michael eventually had him edit them to remove Richard from as many shots as possible, creating an alternative version of their wedding album that they could look at without feeling the sting of betrayal. They kept the original photos, though, stored away as a reminder that things aren't always what they seem, that happiness can hide pain, and that sometimes the most important stories are the ones happening in the background while everyone's focused on the main event. Before I finish this story, I want to ask one more time for your help in reaching our goal of 1,000 subscribers. So please click that subscribe button if you haven't already, because your support makes these stories possible and helps this channel continue to grow. Looking back now, I'm grateful for Marcus's phone call, as painful as the information was, because it saved Catherine from wasting more years of her life with someone who didn't value her. It taught Jennifer and Michael important lessons about marriage and honesty that will serve them well throughout their lives. And it reminded all of us that truth and integrity matter more than comfort and convenience. The 6 months between Jennifer's wedding and Marcus's phone call were filled with so much happening beneath the surface, so many lies being maintained, so much deception being carefully managed, and I'm glad that it all came to light before even more damage was done. Catherine told me recently that she doesn't regret anything, not the marriage that ended, not the years she spent with Richard, not even the painful way it all came apart, because all of it led her to where she is now, a stronger, wiser, more authentic version of herself who knows her worth and refuses to settle for less than she deserves. She said that Marcus's discovery of those photos was like a gift, even though it didn't feel like one at the time, because it freed her from a relationship that was slowly poisoning her life, even if she hadn't fully realized it yet. She said that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened, and I believe she's right. Jennifer has asked me several times if I regret telling Catherine, if I wish I had just kept the information to myself and let everyone continue on with their lives, blissfully unaware of Richard's betrayal. My answer is always the same. No, I don't regret it for a single moment. Yes, it caused pain and upheaval and forced everyone to confront difficult truths, but the alternative would have been allowing lies to continue, allowing Catherine to be disrespected and deceived, allowing Richard to avoid accountability for his choices. The truth is rarely easy, but it's necessary, and I would make the same decision again if faced with the same situation. The whole experience taught me to look more carefully at what's happening around me, to not take relationships at face value, to remember that everyone has hidden struggles and secrets and complexities that aren't visible on the surface. It taught me to value the people in my life who have integrity, who choose honesty even when it's difficult, who stand by their principles even when it would be easier to look the way. It taught me that wedding photos, which we think of as capturing perfect moments of joy and celebration, can also capture truths that we weren't meant to see, realities that existed alongside the happiness, complications that were brewing while everyone smiled for the camera. Marcus's phone call that day, 6 months after the wedding, with those ominous words about needing to show me something, changed everything for our family. It ended a marriage that probably should have ended years earlier. It freed a woman from a relationship built on lies. It taught 2 young people important lessons about trust and commitment, and it reminded all of us that photographers don't just capture what's happening in front of the camera, but sometimes, accidentally, capture the truth that's happening in the shadows, in the background, in the moments when people think no one is watching. That phone call was a gift, even though it hurt, even though it caused chaos, even though it forced us all to face uncomfortable realities. Sometimes the truth is painful, but it's also liberating, and I'm grateful that Marcus had the courage to share what he found, that Catherine had the strength to face it, and that all of us learned from it in our own ways. If this story touched you or made you think about truth and integrity in your own life, please show your support by subscribing to this channel because we're working hard to build a community of 1,000 subscribers who value real stories and honest conversations about the complicated realities of life. Thank you for listening to my story, for staying with me through all the difficult details and painful revelations, and for being part of this community where we share experiences that matter, that resonate, that remind us we're not alone in facing challenges and making difficult decisions. Your subscription and your engagement with these stories mean everything, so please click that subscribe button now and help us continue to grow and share more real-life experiences that connect us all through our shared humanity. What I haven't mentioned yet is how this situation affected my own marriage in ways I never expected. James and I had always prided ourselves on our strong relationship, our open communication, our unwavering trust in each other, but watching Richard's betrayal unfold and seeing the devastation it caused made us both paranoid and hypervigilant in ways that were unhealthy. I started questioning innocent things, like when James came home late from work or when he smiled at his phone while reading a text message, and I hated myself for it because I knew he had never given me any reason to doubt him. He noticed my anxiety, and we had several long conversations about how Richard's actions had triggered fears in both of us that we didn't even know we had. James admitted that he found himself wondering if I would ever betray him the way Richard had betrayed Catherine, if there were secrets I was keeping, if our 35 years together meant anything, if a 32-year marriage could dissolve so quickly. We went to couples therapy together, something we had never needed before, to work through these unexpected insecurities and to strengthen our relationship against the doubt that Richard's betrayal had planted in our minds. Our therapist, a wise woman named Dr. Morrison who had been practicing in Atlanta for over 20 years, helped us understand that vicarious trauma is real, that witnessing someone else's betrayal can create anxiety and fear in our own relationships even when there's no actual threat. She taught us exercises to rebuild trust that had been shaken not by our own actions, but by proximity to someone else's infidelity, and slowly, over many months, we found our way back to the security and confidence we had always felt in our marriage. James started being more deliberately communicative about his schedule and whereabouts, not because I demanded it, but because he wanted to reassure me, and I worked on managing my anxiety and not projecting Richard's sins onto my innocent husband. One particularly difficult moment came about a year after everything happened when we attended a wedding for the daughter of one of our friends. Walking into that church, seeing the bride in her white dress, watching the groom wait nervously at the altar, all of it brought back memories of Jennifer's wedding and the hidden betrayal that had been happening in the background. I felt myself tearing up, but not with joy like the other guests, with sadness for the innocence that had been lost, for the way Richard had tainted something that should have been pure and beautiful. James held my hand throughout the ceremony, understanding without words what I was feeling, and afterward, we talked about how Richard's actions had stolen some of the joy from what should be one of life's most celebratory occasions. I wondered if I would ever be able to attend a wedding again without thinking about what might be happening in the shadows, without scanning the crowd for signs of infidelity, without questioning whether the promises being made at the altar would actually be kept. Jennifer struggled in different ways. She became almost obsessive about honesty in her relationship with Michael, interrogating him about small things, needing constant reassurance that he wasn't like his father, that their marriage wouldn't end up like his parents' marriage. Michael was patient with her, understanding that her anxiety came from trauma, but I could see the strain it put on their relationship. They had several serious fights where Jennifer accused Michael of hiding things from her when he really wasn't, where her fear of betrayal manifested as unfounded suspicion, where the ghost of Richard's infidelity haunted their marriage bed. It broke my heart to watch my daughter, who had always been so trusting and optimistic, become cynical and suspicious, constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. The turning point came when Jennifer discovered she was pregnant, about 18 months after the whole situation with Richard had exploded. The news brought both joy and terror because suddenly the stakes felt even higher. Suddenly, she was bringing a child into a world where she had learned that even people you trust completely can betray you devastatingly. She called me in tears the night she took the pregnancy test. Not tears of happiness, but tears of fear, asking how she could bring a baby into a marriage when she had seen how badly marriages could fall apart, asking what kind of mother she would be when she was so scared and broken. I drove to her apartment immediately, held her while she cried, and told her what I truly believed, that she and Michael were not Richard and Catherine, that they were building their own marriage on their own foundation, and that the baby growing inside her was a blessing and a new beginning. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you don't miss any updates to stories like this one, and help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers by clicking that button right now. Michael was thrilled about the pregnancy, and his excitement helped Jennifer start to shift her perspective from fear to hope. They started attending prenatal classes together, planning the nursery, talking about what kind of parents they wanted to be, and slowly Jennifer began to heal from the trauma of Richard's betrayal. She started to see that her child deserved to grow up with a mother who believed in love and trust, not a mother who was constantly afraid of betrayal, and she worked hard in therapy to overcome her fears and anxiety. Catherine also found unexpected healing through Jennifer's pregnancy. She was going to be a grandmother, and that role gave her something positive to focus on, a reason to look forward instead of dwelling on the past. She threw herself into preparing for her grandchild, buying tiny clothes and stuffed animals, reading books about child development, taking Jennifer to doctor's appointments when Michael had to work. The relationship between Catherine and Jennifer actually grew stronger after the divorce, bonded by their shared experience of pain and recovery, and I was grateful that something beautiful was emerging from the ruins of what had been destroyed. Richard also found out about the pregnancy, and he reached out to Michael asking if he could be part of his grandchild's life. This request created new tension because Michael wasn't sure how to handle it, wasn't sure if he wanted his child to have a relationship with a grandfather who had proven himself to be dishonest and unfaithful. He and Jennifer argued about it, with Jennifer initially saying absolutely not, and Michael feeling guilty about depriving his child of a grandparent. They brought the issue to their couples therapist, who helped them establish boundaries around what contact with Richard might look like if they decided to allow it. Eventually, they decided that Richard could meet his grandchild, but that visits would be supervised and limited, and that if he wanted to be part of this baby's life, he needed to demonstrate through consistent actions over time that he had changed and could be trusted. My granddaughter, Emma, was born on a cold January morning, and holding her in the hospital, seeing Jennifer and Michael look at their daughter with such overwhelming love, I felt hope for the first time in months. This tiny person represented new beginnings, fresh starts, the possibility that our family could heal and grow beyond the pain that Richard had caused. Catherine was there too, and we took turns holding Emma, marveling at her tiny fingers and perfect little face, and in that moment, the past seemed less important than the future we were all building together. Richard did eventually meet Emma when she was about 3 months old, and I was there when it happened because Jennifer asked me to be present. He walked into Michael and Jennifer's apartment carrying an expensive gift, a designer baby outfit that probably cost more than my entire weekly grocery budget, and he looked nervous and uncertain in a way I had never seen before. He held Emma carefully, tears running down his face as he looked at his granddaughter, and he apologized to Michael and Jennifer for everything he had done, for the pain he had caused, for the example he had set, for tainting their wedding and damaging their family. His apology seemed genuine, but I also knew that words were easy and that real change required sustained effort over time. Over the next year, Richard did seem to make an effort to rebuild his relationship with Michael, showing up consistently for scheduled visits with Emma, respecting the boundaries that Michael and Jennifer had established, and eventually, Michael began to soften toward his father, not fully forgiving him but allowing space for a limited relationship. Richard and Vanessa had broken up by this point, their relationship unable to survive the reality of everyday life without the excitement of an affair, and Richard was living alone in a small apartment, a humbling fall from the beautiful home he had shared with Catherine. He told Michael that losing his family had taught him the true cost of his choices, that the temporary pleasure of his affair had cost him everything that actually mattered, and that he would spend the rest of his life trying to make amends. I remained skeptical of Richard's transformation, unable to forget the photos Marcus had shown me, unable to forget watching Catherine's heartbreak, unable to forget the chaos and pain his selfishness had caused for everyone. But I also recognized that holding on to anger and resentment was poisoning my own peace, and I worked with my therapist on forgiveness, not for Richard's benefit but for my own. Dr. Morrison helped me understand that forgiveness doesn't mean condoning what someone did or forgetting what happened, but rather choosing to release the hold that their actions have on your emotional well-being. I would never trust Richard again, would never see him the same way, but I could choose to let go of the anger that was taking up space in my heart. Jennifer and Michael's marriage grew stronger after Emma was born, the shared experience of parenthood bringing them closer together and giving them a common purpose that transcended their individual fears and insecurities. They bought a house in a family-friendly neighborhood with good schools, a charming bungalow with a big backyard where Emma could play, and they hosted family dinners where Catherine and James and I would gather to watch Emma grow and reach new milestones. These dinners were bittersweet at first because Richard's absence was so obvious, an empty chair at the table where he should have been, but over time, we adjusted to the new configuration of our family and created new traditions that didn't include him. Your support helps this channel thrive, so if you value these real stories and want to help us reach 1,000 subscribers, please click subscribe now and be part of our growing community. Catherine started dating a man named Thomas about 2 years after her divorce was finalized, a widower she met at a book club, and watching her laugh and smile with him reminded me that life goes on, that healing is possible, that betrayal doesn't have to define the rest of your story. Thomas was kind and respectful, patient with Catherine's trust issues, willing to move slowly and let the relationship develop naturally without pressure. They took trips together, attended theater performances and art galleries, and Catherine blossomed in ways I hadn't seen in years, maybe hadn't seen even when she was married to Richard. One afternoon, Catherine and I were having coffee at her house, Emma playing on a blanket nearby, and she told me something that stuck with me. She said that Marcus's phone call that day, as devastating as it had been, had actually saved her life because she had been slowly dying inside that marriage, losing herself bit by bit, becoming smaller and less vibrant as she tried to accommodate Richard's selfishness and neglect. She said that the affair was probably just the visible symptom of problems that had existed in their marriage for years, that Richard had been emotionally distant and self-centered long before Vanessa came into the picture, and that if Marcus hadn't found those photos, she might have spent another decade or more in a marriage that was slowly suffocating her spirit. She looked different as she said this, stronger and more confident, wearing brighter colors and styling her hair in a way that was more youthful and playful, and I realized that divorce, as painful as it had been, had actually freed her to become more fully herself. Jennifer overheard this conversation and later told me that it had changed her perspective on everything that had happened. She had been so focused on the betrayal, on the damage that Richard had caused, that she hadn't considered that maybe Catherine was actually better off without him, that maybe the marriage ending was the best possible outcome, even though the way it ended was terrible. This realization helped Jennifer let go of some of her anger toward Richard and toward the situation in general, helped her stop seeing her father-in-law's affair as something that had destroyed their family and start seeing it as something that had transformed their family, painfully, but ultimately for the better. Michael struggled more with this perspective because he still mourned the family he thought he had, the parents whose marriage he had believed was strong and lasting, the father he had admired and wanted to emulate. He went through his own therapy process, working through his feelings of betrayal and disappointment, learning to accept that his father was a flawed human being and that the image Michael had built of him was never entirely accurate. He had to grieve the loss of his idealized father and learn to have a relationship with the real, imperfect man that Richard actually was, and that process took years of work and self-reflection. As Emma grew from a baby into a toddler, she became the center of our reconfigured family, the innocent joy that reminded us all why we were working so hard to heal and move forward. She called Catherine Mimi and me Nana, and she brought light into rooms simply by being in them, completely unaware of the complicated history that had preceded her birth. Richard saw her occasionally, supervised visits where he would play with her and read her stories and buy her extravagant gifts that Jennifer and Michael would later put away, and Emma knew him as Grandpa Richard, a person who existed on the periphery of her life, but not at the center. The third anniversary of Jennifer's wedding arrived, and it was a strange milestone because we all remembered what had been happening beneath the surface on that day 3 years ago, the affair that was being conducted in stolen moments while everyone celebrated. Jennifer and Michael decided to commemorate their anniversary by having Marcus take new family photos, professional portraits with Emma that would represent their real family, their chosen family, the people who had shown up for them and supported them through the hardest period of their lives. The photo shoot was beautiful, full of genuine smiles and real love, and when Marcus delivered the images, they were everything the wedding photos should have been, a true representation of family and commitment and joy without any hidden betrayals lurking in the background. If you're still with me, and this story has moved you, I'd be so grateful if you'd click subscribe to help this channel continue growing toward 1,000 subscribers. Marcus became a friend to our family after everything that happened, someone we trusted because he had proven his integrity when he didn't have to, when it would have been easier to simply delete those photos and never tell anyone what he had discovered. He photographed Emma's first birthday party, and he photographed Catherine and Thomas when they got engaged. Yes, Catherine remarried 3 years after her divorce, and he photographed all the small and large moments of our lives as we rebuilt and reimagined what family meant for us. The impact of Richard's betrayal rippled out in ways we couldn't have anticipated, affecting not just our immediate family, but our friendships and social circles as well. Several couples in our community went through divorces in the years following Richard and Catherine's split, and I often wondered if his affair had served as a wake-up call for others who had been ignoring problems in their own marriages. Affairs that had been hidden came to light, marriages that had been limping along finally ended, and our entire social circle seemed to go through a period of upheaval and reconfiguration. Some people blamed Catherine for not trying harder to save her marriage, a victim-blaming attitude that made me furious, while others praised her for having the strength to walk away from a relationship that wasn't serving her. I found myself becoming more vocal about issues of infidelity and betrayal, less willing to let people make excuses for behavior that hurt others, more willing to stand up for women who were being blamed for their husbands' choices. I lost some friends who felt I was being too judgmental, who thought I should have stayed out of Richard and Catherine's marriage, who believed that telling Catherine about the affair was none of my business. But I also deepened relationships with people who respected my choice to prioritize truth and integrity, who valued honesty even when it was difficult, who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is tell someone a truth they don't want to hear. Jennifer became an advocate for therapy and mental health support, openly sharing her story with friends about how trauma from her father-in-law's affair had affected her marriage and how therapy had saved her relationship with Michael. She started a blog about navigating family betrayal and rebuilding trust, and it attracted a following of people who had experienced similar situations and felt alone in their pain. Reading the comments on her blog posts, seeing how many people had been affected by infidelity either directly or indirectly, reinforced for me that telling Catherine the truth had been the right decision, even though it had caused immediate pain, because the alternative, living with secrets and lies, caused deeper damage over longer periods of time. Michael eventually reconciled more fully with his father, not returning to their previous close relationship, but finding a way to have Richard in his life, without resentment poisoning the connection. He set clear boundaries around what kind of behavior he would accept and what kind of conversations they could have, and Richard, to his credit, respected those boundaries most of the time. Michael told me once that he had realized holding on to anger toward his father was only hurting himself, that Richard would have to live with the consequences of his choices for the rest of his life regardless of whether Michael forgave him, and that choosing forgiveness was really about Michael's own peace and freedom. Emma is 5 years old now, starting kindergarten, a bright and happy child who is growing up in a family that values honesty and communication and has learned hard lessons about the importance of integrity. She doesn't know the full story of what happened before she was born, doesn't understand that her family looked very different 5 years ago, doesn't realize that the peace and stability she enjoys came at a cost paid by the adults around her. Someday, when she's older, we'll tell her the truth about what happened, about how her grandfather's betrayal changed everything, about how her parents and grandmother and all of us worked hard to rebuild and heal, but for now, she simply knows that she is loved deeply by everyone in her life. Looking back on everything that happened, starting with that phone call from Marcus 6 months after Jennifer's wedding, I can see how every decision led to where we are now, how telling the truth set off a chain reaction that transformed multiple lives. Catherine is happily remarried to a man who treats her with respect and devotion. Jennifer and Michael have a strong marriage and a beautiful daughter and are talking about having another baby. I have a deeper appreciation for my own marriage and a clearer understanding of what really matters in life. And even Richard, in his own way, has been forced to confront himself and his choices and hopefully has become a better person because of it, though I remain skeptical of how deep his transformation really goes. The pain was real and intense and affected all of us profoundly, but the growth that came from that pain has been equally profound, and I wouldn't change the decision I made that day when I chose to tell Catherine the truth about her husband's betrayal, because truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a comfortable lie.